Who can stop Manchester City this season? Can anyone stop them? Will they ever stop getting better? I'm joined by JJ Bull and John McKenzie to answer these questions. So Manchester City are going for their 5th consecutive Premier League title. That's quite unprecedented. John, what makes them this good?
Well, I think what makes Pep Guardiola so good is the fact that he's always constantly evolving. We've got a quote here from Rodri, which was in the Players' Tribune recently. This sums it up really nicely for me because he says, "To me, the unique thing about Pep is that he is always one step ahead. He's always evolving before the game around him can evolve. You don't win 4 Premier League titles in a row by standing still. You either reinvent yourself or you die." And this season so far, Pep Guardiola has chosen the first option. He's decided to reinvent himself rather than die. So yeah, I think what we're going to start seeing again this season is that same trudge towards inevitable victory from Manchester City.
So what is different about this season then compared to last season?
Well, what we're getting from Pep Guardiola, I don't think it's like groundbreaking tactics or tactical evolution in that sense, but I think in the context of what's going on in the world tactically, it's quite interesting. So let's just break down what they're doing in possession of the ball, because what we've got here is just the standard Man City 4-3-3 shape. But what we've seen happening this season is Rico Lewis playing because Kyle Walker's been injured, and that has allowed them to bring him inside to invert, as we call it. That means you can have this box midfield. So you've got 4 players in a box here. Or you can do this other nice thing, which is forming a diamond as well. And you can shift between those 2 shapes quite nicely. It gives you different tactical upsides, depending on what the opponent are doing. It can give you advantages all over the pitch.
But what are those advantages then between the 2 very subtle shapes?
Well, I think the reason why Guardiola has made this shift in shape is to do with the fact that he's trying to get advantages from the way that oppositions are trying to press you a little bit more, because what we know these days is that oppositions, when you're trying to build up from the back, they're going to try and block out the middle, because if you block out the middle, you stop the opposition from being really dangerous. If they can build through the middle, they're more likely to be able to generate dangerous chances.
The fastest route to goal, right?
Exactly. So what you want to do is block out the middle, but you want to have access to the wide areas, because you are going to be giving up space in those wide areas. And the general idea is the opposition tries to build up, you jump on them, you force the ball out into these wide areas. And in those moments, what you're doing is you're having all of these jumps around the field to make sure there's no free players, and everyone just jumps up like so. There's no easy option here for Guardiola to find. But actually what you do in these sort of situations, let's say one of the players jumps in to help in the build-up, what you're doing is you're actually allowing space in this area of the pitch, in the middle third. And the idea is that you overload in the opposition's third, because that means that they're not going to be able to build out very easily, so you can have a little bit of a weakness in the middle. Now, obviously Pep Guardiola is going to see that and be like, how can we cause problems here? How can we access players, free players, into this space? Because if you can get, let's say we got De Bruyne here and he ends up with the ball in this kind of space, you're running at the back line, they're overloaded against the back, and it's a horrible situation. Now,
because that case of centre-back, he's not going to go out to the wide area for De Bruyne.
Yeah, exactly. So last season, what we saw from Pep Guardiola was actually him trying to exploit just those sorts of moments, but using mainly fullbacks to do it. So often he would push one of the fullbacks up and then have, let's say, Akanji or Stones pushing into the midfield, and then you would have someone else adopting width on the other side. And I think the idea then was to try and get the opposition to jump up and then try and find the free players. And I think there's a couple of issues here, one of which is that in these sorts of situations, if you push the fullback up, you don't really get the benefit of the space that's there, because the opposition have set up narrow and with lots of access to the wide areas. All you're doing then is changing the height of this wide forward. So if Guardiola goes deep, then you just follow Guardiola deep, and then you end up with no benefit here whatsoever.
He's just tracking the man he knows he's meant to track.
The other thing is that let's say that the opposition are being quite aggressive in their press, and you do manage to get the ball through to Guardiola. It's like, well, great, you've got the ball through to Guardiola. Everyone else is marked up. Guardiola is probably not the sort of creative player that you want to be able to cause problems from this kind of area. So I think that this season, the part of the reason why he's done this shift is because it gives you a couple of advantages in these kinds of positions. Part of which is now you have a back 3, you can actually push your goalkeeper up in deeper areas as well. So you've got that 4, which keeps the opposition having to press with a lot of players forward. And now what you've done then is you've given an extra player in the middle. Lewis can sometimes come out wide, but he often will be in a double pivot in this area because it pins the opposition narrow as well in the line behind. You are going to create this space, but now you have an option of being able to exploit it, because what you can do is you can push De Bruyne out into this area, and now there's a tension there that wasn't there before. Because as we said before, you only had 2 players on this line, so the 2 defenders would just track those 2 players. Now you've got 3 players in that line, and the big question is who's going to track De Bruyne. If you drop out your wide forward, which seems the obvious thing to do. You now got Guardiola in a load of space deeper on the field, which is much more, I think, of a dangerous prospect, because he is going to be able to cause problems from there rather than in the final third. If you don't want to do that and you want to make sure you maintain the pressure so City can't build up really easily, the question is, well, who's going to track across? It's not going to be the fullback, it's probably going to be the centre midfielder. But now what you're doing is you're underloading in the middle, which is what you don't want to do in the first place, because, as we said, teams are trying to block out the middle of the pitch. So this new system, I think, just allows you the opportunity to have more players in that first line, so that the opposition have to jump forward. It's creating that weakness in the middle, and then it's giving you the option with De Bruyne, and you could do it on the other side with Savinho, you could do it with Lewis as well, to actually exploit the space that opens out between this line, with the tension between the fullback and the wide forward having to be filled by someone else. And so, yeah, when you get Kevin De Bruyne operating in those wide areas, when you're creating space around the player in that wide area, you're changing the way that you're building up. What we're going to see, I think, this season is City building through the wide areas more, entering the final third from those wide areas rather than through the middle. And I think that's interesting, because Pep Guardiola made it so important for teams to block out the middle, because he was so dangerous with his teams through the middle. Teams are now blocking out the middle, so he's like, fine, we're going to find ways of getting into dangerous areas from the wide areas as well. And this shows up really nicely on this viz here. Only 3 games worth of data, so take it with a massive pinch of salt. I promised Mark Carey that I would say that when I use this viz. But what we can see so far from Man City this season is they're using those wide areas a lot more than they have done in previous seasons. So we're seeing Guardiola responding to the way that oppositions are pressing by finding the space that their new pressing systems are opening out, exploiting them and being dangerous from them. That's how he evolves, and that's why he's super dangerous, even 15 years after he started his career.
And if there's any player that you want to pick up the ball in those wide spaces with his creative passing, it's Kevin De Bruyne, right? Especially when you've got Erling Haaland up top, who is improving again.
I don't know if he's getting better, but what he is doing is scoring over his expected goals again at the start of this season. Last season is the first time he ever hadn't done that in his career. He always scores over his XG, which is one of the reasons he's one of the world's best players, because the best players in the world beat their XG. He does it consistently, except for when he doesn't, which was last season. It's kind of weird, because the expected goals should show you goals you can expect to score. But you expect with Haaland to score over them, but then they're not getting those goals last season, therefore he's not the difference maker.
He should have his own XG model.
But probably, yeah, him and Harry Kane.
It is worth remembering that an XG model is just based on the average player in shooting from that position, right? So the best strikers are going to be above average at finishing.
Exactly, and he's not the average player, exactly. So then what you have is a player who might be back to his best, which we've seen in the past, so therefore you're going to guarantee yourself goals, which is really useful when you're playing these tactics that will squish the opponents down and block games out. That's one thing that's really good about him. The other thing I've noticed with Erling Haaland, or rather Buggy the Gret on Reddit noticed and shared it on Reddit, which is not where I do all my research, but a lot of it, is that one of the reasons Haaland scores so many goals is that he's never ever offside, which is really, really interesting. So he's been offside, he's played 69 games for City before we record this. He's been offside 15 times in that time.
That seems like very few.
That is very few, that's very few. In fact, in the same time frame, I think Darwin Núñez, not a mile off of how Haaland plays, has been offside 51 times, which is more. And so one of the reasons for this might be that he's amazing at timing his runs. He does this thing where he always curves the run in behind. You're always taught to do that. You curve it so you're not going to be offside when the ball comes through. But also, City don't always play it early. They tend to, if you have a player like this, Guardiola in space, you might have Haaland trying to make the run and they play it early, but City don't. They control it because it means that they don't give a ball away early, so then they don't concede any fast breaks. But the thing with Haaland now is he's scoring over his XG again, which means that they're going to be able to control games in a certain way and rely on him to be able to score goals he probably shouldn't score. But they also have the benefit of someone who's going to be onside when he wants to play through. I like that stat.
And I think we've seen that happening this season. We've seen it a few times where De Bruyne has played the ball through and Haaland can run on. How many of Haaland's goals this season have been him running in behind, taking touch and just having a 1v1 against the keeper? Yeah. It's been way more than I even remember last season, where again it was like breaking stuff down. And that brings us back to that initial tweak that we've seen this season, which is getting De Bruyne into those wide areas actually allows them a way of being able to get the ball in behind for Haaland to run onto, and he's just so dangerous in those situations.
So that's how they score lots and lots of goals. It helps having players with those profiles, but this is how they create those chances. But they do sometimes concede goals, don't they, JJ?
Yes, they do sometimes concede goals. And I've looked at how they concede goals, and there's a couple of ways you can score against them. You know they're going to score against you, especially now, but you can score against them. And I think it's a good thing to do, is to look at how you look at tactics boards normally, because you think of tactics looking like this, these big players on the pitch and how they divide the pitch up. But actually, when you look at a real game in real life, if you're in a stadium, and I noticed this, I think, one of the first times I watched Man City in real life, is this is actually more like what a team looks like. It's like this. They're all tiny, much tinier, but City will squeeze you back so all the little players are in your box and have this space, which obviously creates a lot of space in behind. So you can then try and hit that on the break. But because Man City are so good, you want to bring all your players back. You can't leave someone up here because then you've got someone else spare who can then probably score a goal against you. You can't really play that way. So this is one of the things you want to do, is try and make City create this space, which they're trying to create anyway, and then try and exploit that. Well, one of the ways you can squeeze Man City up, because they're going to try and do that anyway, is by conceding a corner to them. I guess it's not the most sensible way of possibly trying to score goals, but Ipswich did it this season. So this is them playing against Man City. Ipswich are the team in maroon here. The ball's dropped loose. You see all Man City's players are forward, and that means that Ipswich can try and run at them. And one of the ways you can get at Man City is by trying to beat them on this counter-attack by running past players who aren't quite as physical. I think if rather than Kovacic here, it's Rodri, this play probably breaks down because he either fouls someone or it's just better paced to keep up with this player running in behind. Hutchinson goes past Kovacic here, turns back, and they come back. The other way you score against Man City is through individual errors that they make at certain times. Rico Lewis is a very good player. Just makes a tiny error here. He's trying to play the offside line. You can see that. That's what he's trying to play. Just mistimes it slightly, and so this player gets in behind to score a goal against Ederson. But another way you can do it, again, coming down to individual errors, is if the press isn't quite there. So if Man City aren't in their proper rest defence shape, you can get runs at them. Now, if you see in this example here against West Ham, what you have here is Grealish trying to close down Wan-Bissaka. Now, you know that City want to close players down and go man-to-man, trying to stop them from playing out. But I think this is probably an error from Grealish because everyone's not in the right position. If he closes down Wan-Bissaka, what's going to happen here is leave this pass on to go past him, which is why it's probably an error by Grealish to run at him like this, because these two players are out of position. They need to be in position to be able to make this press work. Otherwise, you can be played through too easily. And you can see Guardiola down here is pretty annoyed because that pass does go through and suddenly West Ham haven't turned over. But Man City are good at getting back into defensive shape, do so quickly. And so you have Jared Bowen on the right here. This is not a dangerous situation, really. You can play him to the line. He fires a ball across goal, which ends up going in off Ruben Dias for an own goal. But we know City want to squeeze you back. So the space you're trying to create, they're going to create for you because the way they want to play is to suffocate you and squeeze you in. Here's them playing against Crystal Palace last season. This is another way you can score against them, exactly the same sort of thing. Individual error from Stones, tries to fire a ball into an area you probably can't. And then Crystal Palace can play an up, back and through, and you get in behind the high line, which you create by trying to squeeze your team in. But it's not just teams like Palace and West Ham and others who are weaker who want to sit back and absorb pressure, because obviously you're going to inevitably concede a goal because you've got Erling Haaland scoring goals he shouldn't score. The best teams in the world do this against Man City as well. This is Real Madrid in the Champions League last season. They've stuck 4 players up high to try and pin back Man City's back 4, so there's less coverage in the middle of the pitch, and they're just playing long with the top of the press. They're not even going to try and play through it because it's so hard to play through that press. It's really risky. And of course, by playing it long, you get all these players, and they're now out of the game. So when you get down here, you can rely on players like Jude Bellingham taking the ball out of the air because only certain players in the world can really do this under pressure. Bellingham does that, you push your players forward, and then you start to get these same sort of patterns where you play it around the outside of someone to play in someone into the box. So this is a ball that's a small, tiny area, the back line's not quite in shape. Vinicius Jr. can get in behind. And again, the same sort of thing where you fire it across goal and they just can't quite defend it and it turns into a goal for Real Madrid in this game. But the point is that like Man City will create that space for you by pushing forward to create they're creating fast breaks for you by pushing forward in the way they want to play. And while you want to encourage them to do that, it's also extremely dangerous. But the way you score against them generally is by playing long over the top or by breaking fast. But if they score against you doing the way that encourages that sort of goal, everything you're doing isn't going to work.
And I think maybe the worrying thing here for Manchester City and Pep Guardiola is, okay, he accepts that by playing the way he's going to play, they are going to open themselves up for these fast breaks. But what's been happening in recent seasons is they've been conceding more fast breaks and they've been conceding more goals from them as well. And so what I've got here is a graphic which shows the goals and shots conceded from fast breaks by Manchester City per 90 minutes. So the red bars here are the shots that they're conceding from fast breaks, and the blue bars here are the goals they're conceding from fast breaks. And to be clear, the way that we're defining a fast break is the opposition winning the ball in their own half and then attacking City quickly. So what you can see is that they're basically those counter-attacks where City lose the ball and the opponent come at them quickly. And as you can see, this doesn't really make for good reading for Manchester City fans, because both of these metrics, we can see there's an upward trend. So there are more shots coming in over the course of the data set we have here. But also the goals, as you can see, are increasing. And that's a worrying thing, because if you can see last season, you can see the 50% of those chances from fast breaks actually end up in being a goal, which is quite worrying. Now, this is this season so far. Again, the caveat that it's only 3 games old. But again, the same trend that 50% of those fast breaks are turning into goals. Now, it could be the case that that's just a glitch so far in the season, but it'll be interesting to keep our eye on that to see whether or not that changes over the course of the season.
But one of the reasons they might be conceding on those fast breaks so often is because, like, just byproduct of conceding fast breaks is that you've got so few players to defend, you've got a bigger chance to score, so you're creating higher value XG chances, just chances, to score against you, and that's why you concede those. But you only get those massive chances because City are so dominant and concede so much space in behind.
Yeah.
So it shouldn't be that surprising then that you concede from a large proportion of them, because by nature of the space that's there, the value is high, as JJ's established. And Pep Guardiola, surely he's going to lie awake at night worrying about this kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, again, actually plays into why they've evolved their in-possession structure this season. Because, you know, when we're talking about fast breaks, what we're talking about is Man City having the ball, losing it, and then the opponents attacking quickly. And so we don't need to talk really in this section about out of possession shape, because they don't have time to get into that out of possession shape in these situations. What we actually need to talk about is the in possession shape, which we've already talked about. So if City have evolved their in possession shape, it means they're going to be slightly differently positioned in order to be able to defend these fast breaks. Now, the technical term for that is rest defense. That's what we mean when we talk about rest defense. Rest defense just means, what does your defensive structure look like when you have the ball, so that if you lose it, you can deal with the situations that are thrown at you. So let's go back to last season. So last season, as we said, City built up in a different way. They had this back 4 with the 2 in front of it. And you can see here it's quite an interesting way that they're structuring that, because we've got Kyle Walker here is the fullback. He's pushed on. Actually, what we've got in the middle here is Manuel Akanji pushing into the middle alongside Rodri. So you've got you're basically 3 centre backs in a back line, but one of them stepped up to make a double pivot, and then we've got Doku offering width on the other side. It gives you a really nice 4-2 shape, but it's kind of a kooky way of getting there. But in terms of the rest defence, the situation that you're going to be in if the ball is turned over, you can see there's just a line of 2 here, and then 2 centre midfielders in front of it. We can see that again. This is the last game of last season, which is against West Ham. Same sort of thing happening. So Kanji has jumped up. This time they're building up the other way. So it's Gvardiol who's jumped up, and we've got Walker as one of the centre-backs here. And then we can see width is being offered by Kevin De Bruyne here. But it's the same shape both times, and we can see that rest defence system here. Now, there's a couple of reasons why Pep might want to change this in terms of the build-up shape, because I think that sometimes you put yourself under pressure when you only have 2 players in the first line of your build-up. But obviously when you have an extra player in the first line of your build-up, you have an extra player to defend with, and that's what we've seen happening this season. So this is just a few Premier League games later, obviously with the summer coming in between that, against West Ham, which was the last slide that we saw. But we can see the system is now entirely different. So we've got the back 4 of Gvardiol and Diaz, and then Akanji here. Rico Lewis is the right back. He's come inside alongside Kovacic in the middle. So you've still got your 2 players here. You've got a really nice rest defence structure. You've also got really nice access across the back line if you want to build up, so you can move the ball across from one side to the other quite nicely. And once you've moved the ball down the field, you have the option of pushing someone like Rico Lewis into the front line as well. But what we've got here now is a very different rest defence shape from what we had last season. So you've got 3 players in the first line and then Kovacic in front of them. Now, you may argue that that's still the same number of players, but actually I think it gives you like a nicer coverage across the field, and hopefully for Pep Guardiola, this will help them solve some of those problems. But what I wanted to talk about was actually the fast breaks that they have been conceding this season haven't been from these sorts of situations where they've lost the ball in open play and they've conceded a fast break. It's actually come from them losing the ball after a corner, and that changes things, right? Because it's all well and good having, like, this is a fantastic defensive shape because you've got Akanji, Diaz and Gvardiol with Kovacic in front of them. That's like 3 centre-backs and then a defensive midfielder in front of them. That's going to be a pretty good unit for defending these fast breaks. When you have a corner, you want to send half of these players into the box because they're more likely to score from headers. And so your rest defence from set pieces is going to look a lot weaker, even if you're setting up in the same kind of way. So I wanted to just walk you through an example from the West Ham game of this kind of fast break happening. This has come from the second phase of a corner. So City have taken a corner, the ball's gone in, it's come back out, it's come back in. City have a really good chance of scoring, but actually they lose the ball, and we can see Paqueta here has picked up the ball, and he's in his own 6-yard box. But the ball has turned over, and West Ham are going to strike a fast break here. Because
therefore,
that's
this is a really good chance for West Ham.
Yes, therefore this is a really good chance. Yeah, which obviously shouldn't be the case, but here we go. First thing to notice, Kudus is in space here, right? He's in a position where he can pick the ball up and then cause problems. City haven't done enough to actually defend him in terms of covering him. Bernardo Silva's going to jump out, try and stop this pass through from Paquetá, but it's actually going to get through to Kudus. A series of unfortunate events ensues. The first of which is that Kevin De Bruyne, who is one of the players in that rest defence, so we're already talking not centre-backs, we're talking about an ageing Kevin De Bruyne. He has the chance to stop Kudus. Kudus just breezes past him. And at this point, Pep Guardiola is on the sideline going spare, because this is a very good chance to do a tactical foul, take him out, take the yellow card, but stop this from becoming a dangerous situation. The second unfortunate event, so we've got Jeremy Doku, is a player tracking back. Again, not the sort of player that you want in this situation. He has the opportunity to commit a tactical foul, also doesn't do it. Pep Guardiola is having an aneurysm over here. But the problem is that Kudus is able to breeze through into this space here, and we end up in this situation, which is horrible, right? Because Rico Lewis is the deepest defensive player, and the players dropping back are Kovacic and Jack Grealish against Bowen and Antonio and Kudus. That's a really dangerous set of attacking transitional players against not the best players to defend that for City. And what actually ends up happening is Kudus has this chance, ends up hitting the post. Pep Guardiola goes off to the bench, talks to Juan Malillo and has lots of arm waving, because these are the sorts of moments that kill you if you're City, right? If you're in a scenario where, I mean, this would take them to 2-2. They've still got 40 minutes to go, but you're in one of those uncomfortable moments again where you're like, well, we've still got to break down the opponent. They've had two semi-chances, one of which was an own goal and one of which was caused by us not defending a transitional moment very well. Maybe there's a positive here for Pep Guardiola in that his open play rest defence seems to be working okay, because the chances that are conceding are coming from after set pieces. But I think that, it will remains to be seen whether or not we see those numbers drop down over the course of the season, or whether or not we actually start seeing teams trying to actually target Man City from set pieces, because it can be construed as a really good way of causing them problems. So I think that's one thing to keep
wild, but yeah, that's the amount of space you create by doing that is the one that they can then score from. But then you're also inviting them to score against you.
Yeah.
And now for a brief interlude, let's hear from Phil Hay, our newsletter guru at The Athletic. Phil, what's been happening this week?
Have you been following Italy's sixth tier? If not, you should have been, because we uncovered a cracking little tear up there this week. It came about in a game between ASD Pontesieva and Marino Mercato Subiano. The game was goalless. Pontesieva were on the counter-attack. The striker was clean through, so the coach did what any of us would have done. Ran on the pitch, clipped his heels, and took him out. Naturally, he got a red card, although to be honest, I'd have let him off on the basis of the best hands up not guilty gesture you'll ever see. If you like the sound of this content, and you'd like a little more of it, sign up to the Athletic FC newsletter. All the big stories and all the weird and wonderful stuff, straight to your inbox Monday to Friday.
Fantastic. And if you want to read that newsletter, which you should because it's very good, there is a link in the description. So we've established what they do with the ball, we've established how they're changing without the ball. We've seen how you can score against them, but over the course of a season to stop them winning a title, is that really feasible?
Well, the problem is, Ruben, that no one's ever going to win the league again, because Guardiola has basically broken football in England, as he has everywhere. He's only ever lost 3 titles he's competed for. I'll tell you what those are in a second. But to put it into context, in the Premier League, before he arrived, the 10 years before Guardiola arrived in Premier League, to win it, you needed to get 86.4 points on average. That's how you'd win the Premier League. Since he's been there, he joined in 2016-17. The average points needed to win the Premier League is 93.7, which you'll have observed is more.
Quite a lot more.
And to get that many points, you basically have to win every single game. You can't lose any. City lose like 3 or 4 games a season. All their competitors can't afford to drop points by, say, getting a red card and then drawing with Brighton or things like that. You need to win all your games. You can't drop points anywhere. And Guardiola has done this consistently throughout his entire career. So he evolves always to stay ahead of the chasing pack. And you can see it, like the league titles he hasn't won, I'm going to tell you now. The first one was to the best ever Real Madrid side. They broke all the records in La Liga. The second one he didn't win was the first season when he was at Man City. And the third one he didn't win was during COVID, when Liverpool won the league, massively overperforming their expected goals. The underlying numbers had City somewhere. Well, basically, they should have won it.
Kind of caveats in those City seasons as well, right? Like the first season, his squad wasn't his.
Yeah, he came in exactly. Yeah.
The other one, Leroy Sané tears his ACL, and
But now it very much is his, and so it's very hard to see how you can possibly beat them. But I'm sure there are some competitors who could hope to beat every other team the entire season long?
Well, the main one is Arsenal, right? They've come second the past 2 seasons. They've strengthened in the window, bringing in some quality that they see as like win now players in Calafiori and Marino, and now Sterling on loan. Can they do it though? How are they evolving to catch up with Pep City?
Yeah, I think the evolution is definitely there for Mikel Arteta. He has changed the way that he's played since his time at Arsenal. I think a lot of people sort of see him as just being Pep Guardiola light, because obviously he was his assistant at City. And you could make the argument, I think, in 22-23 that he was doing similar sort of tactical things to Guardiola. They signed Zinchenko, they signed Jesus, they start playing that Guardiola style of play. But I think actually what's remarkable about Arsenal is the evolution has taken them in a very different direction. And that is towards becoming the best out of possession team in the world and almost trying to change the meta of the game and being like, okay, well, what we're going to try and do is take goals out of the game. We're going to be very, very hard to score against. And maybe that will have a knock-on impact on how good we are at scoring goals ourselves. But we'll try and offset that by being really, really good from set pieces. So defend really well, don't allow your opponents to score, and then rely on the fact that you have the ability to be super dangerous from those set pieces as well.
Hence the 4 centre-backs, right? Because you look at that 11 and it looks like 6 defensive players and 4 attacking players.
Yeah, and I mean, but that is a City playbook thing, but I guess with City it's all about defending fast breaks, as we said, whereas I think with Arsenal it's a little bit more just about let's make our defence impregnable. We'll make it so hard for teams to score so that all we need to do is score 1 or 2 goals to guarantee winning. I guess for me, the question is whether or not this is a sustainable way of playing football, whether or not it can be a meta where you can challenge Pep Guardiola. And I guess that's what Arteta's seen. He said, well, if we try and play the way that City play, they're going to beat us because they're better at it. They've been doing it for longer, and Guardiola has the ability to make those tweaks that make them so dangerous. So yeah, for me, it's all about whether or not this evolution is sustainable enough. Was last season an outlier? Did they variance upwards? Did everything roughly go their way? Can you play in this super intense out of possession style without it breaking your squad in the long run? We've seen Arteta basically have roughly this squad for about 3 seasons now, and usually what happens is you start getting a physical decline in those moments. We've talked about Bukayo Saka playing lots and lots of minutes. Odegaard is a super important player for them. He's played a load of minutes. He's got injured now. What impact is that going to have? So I think this season is going to be really interesting for us to see whether or not Arsenal can actually maintain their evolution and challenge at the top of the table.
It's quite a key difference as well, isn't it? You look at this table and Arsenal barely ever changed their team, and Odegaard's injury, we don't know yet, but it will presumably have quite a big impact. And the difference being with City, they missed De Bruyne for large chunks of last season and found solutions because they have the depth and other players and Pep Guardiola, right?
And this season as well, the new system that City have been playing relies on players like Rico Lewis and Kovacic. Phil Foden hasn't played many minutes. Rodri hasn't played at all. We've got Kyle Walker coming back as well. City have been able to absorb those injuries to some of their better players and still be top of the league. They're going to be able to bring those players in now. There's questions about how he's going to tweak the system with those players in, but they've been able to absorb that loss. And so, yeah, I think the question with Arsenal is like, how dependent is their style of play on the individuals they have?
So, going to be a challenge for Arsenal. Will there be a third horse in this race again? What about Liverpool? They've changed under Arne Slot. They're looking very good.
Liverpool have naturally changed because they have a new manager with some different things in there. And what we know Slot wants to do is try and encourage teams to press them high. There's a single player in this team pushing them high, because as they push them high, it means that they'll create lots more space in behind for them to attack. So that's what they want to try and do. That Liverpool would encourage the team to come onto them and attack that. But they still have the parts laid over from the Jurgen Klopp era where when they're a bit further up the pitch, they can still find ways to create goals, maybe a big switch or having Salah dribble past 8 players, something like that. They have those solutions. But what you'll probably find later in the season is that most teams will play Liverpool maybe once. Analysts will work out how they play. They'll work out that the best way to stop them from playing the way they want to is to stop playing against them the way they want them to. So if you don't press Liverpool, they can't build the way they want to. So you've got to find new solutions. And if you find ways to block that, say marking the players who are getting the long switch passes, it might encourage Slot to have to evolve. Whether he'll get that right and it'll work the way they want to, we don't know yet. But that's maybe what you'll see, is that it'll work for the first half of the season and then it might not. We don't know.
Very similar to the issues that Brighton encountered under De Zerbi when teams started to...
Exactly the same, yeah. And then interestingly on that note, Brighton might be one of these teams that benefits from a slight bit of unrest at the top of the table this season, because there's so many teams who aren't probably going to be there that maybe should. Maybe Chelsea turn out to be great. Maybe Man United will be rescued somehow. The teams who've done well in the past maybe aren't the massive ones, or ones with quite a clear tactical identity, maybe something new. I'm thinking like Conte's Chelsea, that was quite new, and they stormed at the table. Even like Ranieri's Leicester. There's nothing new. You ping them forward, you exploit fast breaks, you use people like Jamie Vardy, offside much more than Erling Haaland is, and therefore you can gain yourself some wins, but also gain momentum. And if you can get those two things, I think of Liverpool, they evolved each season on season before they won the title, and in that final season they rode momentum and then really took it forward. It's kind of impossible to derail momentum once you get it.
And when Leicester obviously pulled off that miracle, there were factors like all of the big six having weird transitional off years, and the fact that Leicester were Leicester. So despite the fact that they kept doing the same thing over and over again that kept working, nobody adapted to it because they still thought, oh, it's only Leicester, we can beat them. And they actually really benefited from that, I think.
So perhaps actually Leicester this season might be the ones that can stop Man City by encouraging them to try and score 7 goals, hoping they don't score any of them, and then hitting them twice in fast breaks to score the goals that Man City concede.
Maybe.
If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. The Athletic is home to some of the world's best sports journalists, including David Ornstein, Amy Lawrence and James Horncastle. With the latest transfer news and insights on every Premier League story that matters, theathletic.com puts you inside football, and you can try it for free now for 30 days. See the link in the description.